My name is Bridget Stone, and at 60 years old, I thought I understood rejection. I was wrong. It was a bitter December morning in Connecticut when I first heard about the cruise. Not from my daughter Victoria directly, of course. That would have required her to acknowledge my existence. Instead, I overheard her on the phone in my own kitchen, planning what she called the most amazing New Year's celebration ever. I'd been arranging white roses in a crystal vase, a weekly ritual I'd maintained since my husband passed 5 years ago. The house felt too quiet most days, too large for just one person, but it was still beautiful, still elegant, still the home where I'd raised Victoria and her brother before cancer took him at 28. The yacht holds 30 people comfortably, Victoria was saying, her voice bright with excitement. We'll have champagne at midnight, a live band, dancing under the stars. James's entire family is coming, his parents, his siblings, even his cousins from California. My hands paused on the rose stems. A 30-person yacht for New Year's Eve. I hadn't heard anything about this. Yes, even Amanda is flying in from college, Victoria continued. You remember Amanda, my roommate from Yale? She's bringing her new boyfriend too. I set down the vase and walked quietly toward the kitchen where Victoria paced by the windows, her phone pressed to her ear. At 35, she was still beautiful, the kind of striking brunette who turned heads in restaurants. She'd inherited my bone structure and my husband's ambition, but somewhere along the way, she'd lost whatever warmth I'd tried to instill in her. The weather should be perfect, she was saying. Clear skies, calm waters. James spared no expense. This yacht has everything. 3 decks, a full bar, even a hot tub. I cleared my throat softly, and Victoria turned. For just a moment, something flickered across her face. Guilt, maybe, or annoyance at being overheard. Listen, I'll call you back, she said into the phone, then hung up and faced me with that practiced smile she used when she wanted something. Mom, I didn't know you were home. It's my house, Victoria. I live here. She laughed, but it sounded forced. Of course. I just meant. Well, anyway, I'm glad you're here, James, and I wanted to talk to you about New Year's Eve. Hope fluttered in my chest like a caged bird. After years of being relegated to obligatory holiday dinners and brief weekend visits, maybe Victoria was finally ready to include me in her life again. The cruise sounds wonderful, I said carefully. When do we leave? Victoria's expression shifted, the fake warmth cooling by several degrees. Oh, Mom, no. That's not. Look, this is really more of a young people's thing. You know how these parties can get. Loud music, late nights, lots of drinking. You wouldn't enjoy it. The words hit me like ice water. I see. Don't be dramatic, Mom. It's not personal. It's just that the yacht has limited space, and we've already committed to James's family and our closest friends. There simply isn't room for everyone we'd like to invite. I nodded slowly, my face a mask of calm, even as something cold and sharp began forming in my chest. Of course. I understand. Great. I knew you'd be reasonable about it. Maybe we can do something quiet for New Year's Day instead? Just you, me, and James? That sounds lovely, dear. Victoria beamed at my easy acceptance, kissed my cheek, and gathered her things. You're the best, Mom. I'll call you after the cruise to set up lunch. After she left, I stood in my empty kitchen staring at the white roses. They were perfect, flawless petals, elegant stems, beautiful and dignified. But they were also cut flowers, severed from their roots, slowly dying in their crystal prison. Rather like me, I thought. That evening, I tried to convince myself that Victoria's rejection didn't matter. I had my books, my garden, my volunteer work at the art museum. I'd built a full life after losing my husband and son. I didn't need my daughter's approval to be complete. But late that night, unable to sleep, I made the mistake of checking social media. Victoria had posted a photo from what looked like a planning meeting. The caption read, "Final preparations for our amazing New Year's yacht party. Can't wait to celebrate with all our favorite people." The photo showed Victoria and James surrounded by at least 15 other people, all young and glamorous and laughing. I recognized James's parents, Harold and Susan, whom I'd known for years. Harold had been my husband's business partner. Susan and I had served on charity boards together. I scrolled through the comments, seeing names I knew. College friends of Victoria's I'd hosted for countless dinners. Family friends who'd attended my husband's funeral. Even Mrs. Patterson from down the street, whose daughter was married to one of James's cousins. 30 people. Victoria had said the yacht held 30 people comfortably. I counted the faces in the photo again, then checked the guest list she'd posted in the comments. 28 confirmed attendees, with 2 more maybes. There was space. There had always been space. Victoria simply hadn't wanted me there. I closed my laptop and walked to my bedroom window, looking out at the snow-covered grounds of my estate. In the distance, I could see the lights of other houses, families preparing for New Year's Eve, parents and children and grandchildren gathering to celebrate the future. I was 60 years old, and my only remaining child had decided I wasn't worth including in her celebration. Not because of space constraints or party dynamics, but because I was too old and she was embarrassed by me. The humiliation burned like acid in my throat. I devoted 35 years to raising Victoria, sacrificing career opportunities and personal desires to be the perfect mother. I'd paid for her education, supported her through her divorce from her first husband, helped her start her interior design business. When James came along, I'd welcomed him like a son and helped fund their wedding. And this was my reward. To be discarded like an outdated piece of furniture, pushed aside so my daughter could celebrate with young people while I spent New Year's Eve alone in my empty house. But as I stood at that window, feeling the familiar weight of my pearl necklace against my throat, something shifted inside me. The pain of rejection began to crystallize into something harder, colder, more purposeful. Victoria had made her choice. She'd chosen James's family over her own mother, chosen her college friends over the woman who'd given her life, chosen appearances over love. I walked to my husband's old study, where I kept his address book in the antique roll-top desk. My fingers traced over names I hadn't thought about in years, people from our old life before grief and loneliness had shrunk my world down to manageable proportions. I stopped at one name, Captain Thomas Hartwell, U.S. Navy, retired. Tom had served with my husband in Vietnam, had been best man at our wedding, had helped carry my son's coffin at the funeral. He'd moved to Maine after retirement, where he worked as a maritime consultant for the Coast Guard. I hadn't spoken to Tom in 3 years. Not since Christmas dinner, when Victoria had made it clear that my old friends weren't particularly welcome at family gatherings. But Tom Hartwell knew boats. More importantly, Tom Hartwell knew the waters off the Connecticut coast, knew which routes were safe and which were treacherous, especially in winter weather. I looked at the phone for a long moment, my hand hovering over the receiver. Victoria had said there wasn't space for me on her precious yacht. She dismissed me as too old, too irrelevant, too dramatic. Perhaps it was time to show her exactly how dramatic an old woman could be. I dialed Tom's number. Before we continue with Bridget's shocking plan, I want to pause and speak directly to you. If you've ever been told you're too old to start over, let me tell you, that's a lie. Your story isn't over, and you still have chapters left to write. Our best-selling book, Reclaiming Your Peace After Pain, is filled with simple, powerful steps to help you heal, rebuild, and fall in love with life again. Click the link in the description box and start your new beginning today. Like this video if Bridget's quiet fury resonates with you. Subscribe for more stories of strength and justice, and ring that notification bell, because sometimes the most powerful revenge comes from the people others underestimate most. Now, let's see what Bridget said in that phone call. Tom Hartwell answered on the fourth ring, his voice rough with sleep and years of cigarettes. Hello. Tom, it's Bridget Stone. A pause, then warmth flooding his voice. Bridget. Well, I'll be damned. How long has it been? Too long, I said, settling into my husband's leather chair. I know it's late, Tom, but I need to ask you about something. Hell, you know you can call me any time, day or night. What's on your mind? I looked out the study window at the snow falling in the lamplight, choosing my words carefully. Tom was a good man, honorable in the way that military men of his generation often were. He wouldn't help me if he knew the full extent of what I was planning. There's a yacht leaving from Mystic Harbor tomorrow evening, I said. New Year's Eve cruise. I'm worried about the weather forecast. Mystic Harbor, huh? What's the vessel? A charter yacht called Golden Dawn. About 30 passengers. I heard the sound of shuffling papers. Probably Tom checking his weather charts. He'd always been meticulous about maritime conditions. Bridget, what's your interest in this particular cruise? My daughter Victoria is on it. She's celebrating New Year's Eve with her husband's family. Another pause, longer this time. And you're not going with them? The question hung in the air, loaded with implications. Tom had known Victoria since she was a child, had bounced her on his knee at family barbecues. He would understand the significance of my absence. No, I said simply. I wasn't invited. Tom's silence spoke volumes. In his generation, excluding your mother from a family celebration was unthinkable, a violation of basic respect and decency. I see, he said finally, his voice carefully neutral. Tom, I've been watching the marine weather reports, and I'm concerned about conditions tomorrow night. Strong winds, heavy seas. Is it safe for a pleasure cruise? I heard him typing on his computer, pulling up official weather data. Jesus, Bridget, you're right to be worried. We've got a nor'easter building, due to hit the coast around midnight. Winds up to 40 knots, seas 8 to 12 feet. No recreational vessel should be out in that. Surely the charter company would cancel if conditions were dangerous? Tom snorted. You'd think so, but charter companies make their money on holidays like New Year's Eve. They've probably got tens of thousands of dollars on the line. Some of these operators will risk it if they think they can beat the weather. My pulse quickened. What would happen if a yacht was caught in those conditions? Depends on the size of the vessel, experience of the crew, how well it's maintained. But Bridget, even a good boat with a good crew can get in serious trouble in a 40-knot blow, especially if they're carrying passengers who panic. I closed my eyes, feeling the pieces of my plan clicking into place like a perfectly calibrated watch. Tom, is there someone at the Coast Guard who might pay closer attention to charter operations tomorrow night? Someone who might be more vigilant about safety violations? Another long pause. Tom was no fool. He could hear the subtext in my question. Bridget, what exactly are you asking me to do? I chose my next words very carefully. I'm asking you to help keep my daughter safe. If you know someone who could make sure that yacht doesn't leave harbor in dangerous conditions, I'd be grateful. And if the boat has already departed before the weather hits, then I want to make sure the Coast Guard was ready to respond quickly when they send out a distress call. Tom was quiet for so long I wondered if he'd hung up. Tom, I'm here. Bridget, you know I'd do anything for you and David's memory. But I need to understand what I'm getting involved in here. I thought about Victoria's dismissive tone, her casual cruelty, the photo of all those smiling faces celebrating without me. My daughter has decided that I'm too old to be part of her life, Tom. She's cutting me out of family celebrations, treating me like an embarrassment. But when something goes wrong, and something always goes wrong, she'll meet her mother. And I want to be ready to help her. It wasn't entirely a lie. I did want to be there for Victoria when her perfect evening fell apart. I just wanted to be the one controlling exactly how it fell apart. I see, Tom said quietly. And you think this storm might cause problems for their cruise? I think 30 people on a charter yacht in a nor'easter is a recipe for disaster. Don't you? Another pause, then a sigh.
Yeah, Ido.
All right, Bridget. I've got a friend in the Coast Guard station at New London. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Webb. Good officer, takes safety seriously. I'll give her a call. Make sure she's aware of the Golden Dawn's departure tomorrow night. Thank you, Tom. Bridget, be careful. Whatever you're really planning here, just be careful. After I hung up, I sat in David's chair for a long time, thinking about the conversation. Tom would make his call, and Lieutenant Commander Webb would pay attention to the Golden Dawn. When the weather turned ugly, and it would turn ugly, help would be standing by. But there would still be hours of terror first. Hours when Victoria and her precious guests would face the reality that their perfect celebration had become a fight for survival. Hours when Victoria would realize that the old woman she dismissed as too dramatic might be the only person in the world who cared enough to save her. I walked upstairs to my bedroom and began planning what I would wear tomorrow night. Something elegant but practical, suitable for a woman who might need to drive to the hospital or the Coast Guard station. Something that would photograph well if the media showed up to cover the dramatic rescue of socialites from a sinking yacht. Something that would make Victoria realize exactly what kind of woman she'd chosen to humiliate. I selected a midnight blue dress, designer, perfectly tailored, appropriate for either a New Year's Eve dinner or a family crisis. My pearl necklace and matching earrings, the ones David had given me for our 25th anniversary. Low heels that I could walk in for hours if necessary. I would look exactly like what I was, a dignified, beautiful woman of means, someone who commanded respect and attention. The kind of woman who didn't deserve to be excluded from her own daughter's celebration. The kind of woman who was dangerous when crossed. I set my clothes out carefully, then went to bed. Tomorrow would be a long day, and I wanted to be well-rested for Victoria's New Year's Eve surprise. After all, she'd said she wanted her celebration to be unforgettable. I intended to make sure it was. I woke on New Year's Eve to a sky the color of old pewter, heavy with the promise of snow. The weather reports confirmed what Tom had told me the night before. A massive storm system was building off the coast, due to hit Connecticut around midnight. Perfect timing. I spent the morning in my usual routines, but everything felt different now, charged with purpose. I arranged fresh flowers in the foyer, white lilies this time, more dramatic than roses. I reviewed my financial portfolio, noting with satisfaction that my investments had performed well this year. I was a wealthy woman in my own right, independent and secure. Not that Victoria seemed to remember that. Around noon, my phone rang. Victoria's name appeared on the caller ID, and for a moment I wondered if she was calling to invite me after all, perhaps feeling guilty about excluding me. "Hello, darling," I said, keeping my voice warm and maternal. "I just wanted to check in before we leave for the yacht. Make sure you're okay with being alone tonight." The casual cruelty of it took my breath away. She was calling to make sure I was properly resigned to my exclusion, not to offer any alternative. "Oh, I'll be fine, sweetheart. I have a lovely bottle of champagne chilled, and I'm planning to watch the ball drop from Times Square. Very cozy." "That sounds perfect for you, Mom. Much better than being on a crowded boat with loud music and drunk 20-somethings, right?" I gripped the phone tighter. "Absolutely.
You know me so well."
"Great. Well, I should go finish packing. The weather's supposed to get rough later, but James says we'll be back to shore long before then." "I'm sure you will be, dear. Have a wonderful time. Love you, Mom. See you for lunch on New Year's Day." After she hung up, I stood in my kitchen, staring at my reflection in the window. My long gray hair was perfectly styled, my skin still smooth and elegant despite 60 years of life. I was beautiful, intelligent, accomplished, and my own daughter was ashamed of me. That evening, I dressed carefully in my midnight blue ensemble, fastened my pearls, and applied my makeup with the precision of a woman preparing for battle. I looked like exactly what I was: old money, refined taste, understated power. I poured myself a glass of wine and settled by the window to wait. At 7 o'clock, Tom called. "Bridget, I spoke to Sarah Webb this afternoon. She's got the Golden Dawn on her radar, and she's moving a cutter into position off Mystic Point. If that boat runs into trouble, help will be close by." "Thank you, Tom. That gives me tremendous peace of mind." The weather's deteriorating faster than predicted. Storm should hit around 11:30 now, maybe earlier. I looked outside at the snow beginning to fall harder, wind rattling the windows. "I'm sure they'll cut the cruise short if conditions get dangerous," I said. "Yeah, I'm sure they will," Tom replied, but his voice suggested he wasn't sure at all. At 8 o'clock, I checked social media one more time. Victoria had posted photos from the dock in Mystic, glamorous people in evening wear boarding an impressive white yacht, champagne glasses already in hand. The Golden Dawn was beautiful, sleek and modern, flying colorful flags for the occasion. The caption read, "Setting sail for the most incredible New Year's Eve ever. Perfect weather, perfect company, perfect night ahead." I smiled at the irony. At 9 o'clock, my phone rang again. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize. "Mrs. Stone? This is Captain Rodriguez from the Golden Dawn. I understand your daughter Victoria is one of our passengers tonight." My pulse quickened. "Yes, that's correct. Ma'am, I'm calling because we're monitoring weather conditions and there's some concern about the forecast. I wanted to confirm our emergency contact information. You're listed as Victoria's closest relative." I am. Interesting that Victoria had listed me as her emergency contact while excluding me from the celebration itself. "We may need to adjust our schedule due to weather conditions. If there are any changes, you'll be our first call." "I appreciate that, Captain Rodriguez. Is there immediate cause for concern?" "Not at the moment, ma'am. We're experienced with winter weather sailing, but we always like to keep families informed." After he hung up, I felt a flicker of something that might have been doubt. Captain Rodriguez sounded competent and cautious. Perhaps the evening wouldn't unfold as dramatically as I'd hoped. But then I looked at Victoria's latest social media update, posted from the yacht's deck. The group was clearly already intoxicated, champagne bottles scattered across tables, young people dancing without any awareness of the wind beginning to build around them. James had his arm around Victoria, both of them laughing at something off-camera. In the background, I could see his parents, Harold and Susan, looking uncomfortable as spray from the increasing waves splashed across the deck. The photo caption read, "Who needs land when you have the perfect floating party? Hashtag New Year's Eve, hashtag yacht life, hashtag no old people allowed." The hashtag hit me like a slap. No old people allowed. My daughter had literally hashtagged her exclusion of me from the family celebration. I set down my wine glass with a hand that no longer trembled with hurt, but with cold fury. At 10:30, the snow was falling heavily, and I could hear the wind howling around my house. I checked the marine weather report one more time. Conditions had deteriorated even faster than predicted. Winds were already at 35 knots and building. Any sensible captain would be heading for port immediately. But as I scrolled through social media, I saw that Victoria was still posting from the yacht. The most recent photo showed the party in full swing, people dancing in the main salon, oblivious to the weather outside. I picked up my phone and dialed a number I'd memorized but never used. "New London Coast Guard Station, this is Petty Officer Martinez. This is Bridget Stone. I believe Lieutenant Commander Webb is expecting my call regarding the vessel Golden Dawn." "Yes, ma'am, please hold." A moment later, a crisp female voice came on the line. "Mrs. Stone, This is Lieutenant Commander Webb. Captain Hartwell briefed me on your concerns about the Golden Dawn. Commander Webb, I'm looking at social media posts from the yacht, and it appears they're still at sea despite the deteriorating conditions. Yes, ma'am. We're tracking them. We've been in radio contact with Captain Rodriguez, advising him to return to port, but he's insisting he can weather the storm. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature outside. What does that mean for the passengers? It means they're about to have a very rough night, Mrs. Stone. We've got a cutter standing by, and we're monitoring their position closely. But if they don't turn around soon... She didn't need to finish the sentence. Thank you, Commander. Please keep me informed. Of course, ma'am. I hung up and walked to my window, watching the storm rage outside my warm, safe house. Somewhere out there in the darkness, Victoria was about to learn that the old woman she dismissed as irrelevant was the only person in the world who'd cared enough to make sure help would be ready when her perfect evening turned into a nightmare. But first, she would have to survive the storm. At 11:15, my phone rang. Victoria's number appeared on the screen, and I could hear screaming in the background before she even spoke. Mom? Oh my God, we're in so much trouble. While I sat in my warm study watching the storm build, 30 miles offshore, Victoria's perfect evening was beginning to crack like thin ice under pressure. The Golden Dawn had departed Mystic Harbor at sunset with 32 passengers and a crew of 6. Captain Rodriguez, despite his responsible-sounding phone call to me, had been pressured by the charter company to proceed with the cruise. $28,000 in fees were at stake, and New Year's Eve bookings were the most profitable of the year. Victoria stood on the main deck in a silver cocktail dress that cost more than most people's monthly rent, champagne flute in one hand, her phone in the other as she documented every moment of what she'd called the most exclusive New Year's Eve celebration in Connecticut. The yacht was impressive, a 100-foot motor vessel with 3 levels, a full bar, professional kitchen, and amenities that rivaled a luxury hotel. James's father, Harold, had spared no expense, wanting to impress his business associates and give his son the kind of celebration that would be talked about for years. Can you believe this? Victoria said to her college roommate Amanda, gesturing at the elegant crowd around them. Everybody who's anybody is here. This is exactly the kind of evening Mom would never understand or appreciate. Amanda nodded, though she looked slightly uncomfortable. She'd always liked me during her visits to our house, and she remembered the elaborate dinner parties I'd hosted for Victoria's friends over the years. Are you sure your mom wouldn't have enjoyed this? Amanda asked quietly. I mean, she's always been so elegant and social. Mom's idea of a party is tea and finger sandwiches with her museum board friends. This is young, sophisticated, real celebration. She'd just sit in the corner looking disapproving and making everyone feel guilty for having fun. What Victoria didn't know was that several of the other guests had been surprised by my absence. Harold and Susan had specifically asked James where I was, expressing disappointment that I hadn't been included. Mrs. Patterson had mentioned to her daughter that it seemed odd for Victoria to exclude her own mother from such a family gathering. But James had supported Victoria's decision, backing up her story that the yacht was overcrowded and that I preferred quiet evenings at home anyway. Trust me, James said to his parents when they pressed the issue, Bridget's much happier this way. Victoria knows her mother better than anyone. As the yacht cruised along the Connecticut coast, the party was everything Victoria had envisioned. A live jazz trio played sophisticated music while guests mingled on multiple decks. The bar served premium liquors and vintage wines. Professional photographers captured every moment for social media and the society pages. Victoria held court like a princess, accepting compliments on her dress, her party planning skills, her choice of venue. She felt vindicated in her decision to exclude me. Clearly, everyone was having a wonderful time without the awkward presence of her aging mother. But by 10 o'clock, The first signs of trouble were beginning to appear. The wind had been building steadily throughout the evening, and waves that had started as gentle swells were now large enough to cause champagne to slosh in glasses. Several guests commented on the increasing motion of the yacht, and a few people had moved inside from the open decks. Captain Rodriguez appeared increasingly tense, checking weather reports and radio communications with growing frequency. He'd been in contact with the Coast Guard twice, receiving advisories to return to port, but the charter company's representative aboard the yacht kept pressuring him to continue. The party's just getting started, the rep argued. These people paid premium prices for a midnight champagne toast at sea. You can't cut it short because of a little wind. Sir, this isn't a little wind anymore, Rodriguez replied. We're looking at 30-knot gusts with seas building to 8 feet. I need to get these people back to harbor. But James, emboldened by expensive scotch and the desire to prove his sophistication, sided with the charter representative. Captain, we're all adults here, he said with the confidence of someone who'd never faced real danger. We can handle a little rough weather. It's New Year's Eve. We need to be at sea for midnight. Victoria agreed enthusiastically, posting to social media. Real sailors aren't afraid of a little wind. This is going to make the evening even more memorable. She had no idea how prophetic those words would prove to be. By 10:30, the yacht was fighting 8-foot seas and winds gusting to 35 knots. The elegant crowd that had been dancing on the upper deck was now crowded into the main salon, faces beginning to show concern as the vessel pitched and rolled with increasing violence. The jazz trio had stopped playing, their instruments secured to prevent damage. Several guests had developed seasickness, and the cheerful party atmosphere was giving way to nervous conversation and worried glances. Victoria, determined to maintain the facade of sophistication, continued to project confidence even as she gripped the bar rail to keep her balance. "This is so exciting," she called out to the crowd, though her voice carried a slight edge of hysteria. "It's like something from a movie." But Amanda, who'd grown up sailing with her family, pulled Victoria aside with genuine concern. "Vicky, this is getting dangerous. The boat's taking too much punishment and people are scared. Maybe we should ask the captain to head back." Victoria looked around the salon at the 30-plus guests who'd paid to attend her exclusive celebration. Many of them were wealthy, influential people, the kind of social connections she'd cultivated carefully over the years. The idea of cutting the evening short, of admitting that her perfect party was a disaster, was unbearable. "Don't be dramatic, Amanda. The captain knows what he's doing." But Captain Rodriguez was fighting a losing battle. The storm had intensified beyond all predictions, with winds now approaching 40 knots and seas building to 12 feet. The Golden Dawn, while seaworthy, was not designed for these conditions with a load of panicking passengers. At 10:45, a massive wave struck the yacht's starboard side, sending glasses and bottles crashing to the floor and throwing several guests against the bulkheads. The lights flickered, and for a terrifying moment, the vessel listed so heavily that everyone thought it might not recover. When the yacht finally righted itself, the party atmosphere was officially dead. Guests were crying, some were praying, and several were demanding to know why they were still at sea in such dangerous conditions. Harold grabbed James by the arm, his face pale with fear and anger. "Son, this has gone far enough. People could be killed. We need to get back to shore now." James looked around at the chaos. Elegant people in evening wear clinging to whatever they could find for stability, several guests vomiting from seasickness, the yacht's crew working frantically to secure loose items and check for damage. This wasn't the sophisticated celebration he'd envisioned. This was a disaster. But it was Victoria who finally broke, as another massive wave sent her crashing into a bulkhead, her silver dress torn and her perfect makeup streaked with tears. She pulled out her phone with shaking hands and dialed the only number that mattered now. The person she'd excluded from her perfect evening because she was too old and too dramatic. Her mother.
Mom? Huh?
Oh my God, we're in so much trouble. Are you feeling Bridget's cold satisfaction as her plan unfolds? If this story of calculated revenge is gripping you, hit that like button and let us know in the comments what you think of Victoria's situation. Have you ever been excluded by family only to have them need you later? Don't forget to subscribe for more incredible stories of justice and transformation. And remember, our book, Reclaiming Your Peace After Pain, offers guidance for anyone rebuilding their strength after betrayal. The link is in the description. Now, let's see how Bridget responds to Victoria's desperate call. The phone call came at exactly 11:17 p.m., just as I was lighting my final candle in the dining room where I'd set a table for one. I'd planned an elegant New Year's Eve dinner by myself. Prime rib, roasted vegetables, a bottle of Dom Perignon that David and I had been saving for a special occasion that never came. Victoria's name appeared on my phone screen, and I let it ring 3 times before answering with perfect composure. Hello, darling. Mom?
Huh?
Oh my God, we're in so much trouble. Victoria's voice was barely recognizable, high-pitched with panic and nearly drowned out by screaming in the background. Victoria? What's wrong, sweetheart? I kept my voice calm, maternal, concerned, but not panicked. The storm, it's so much worse than they said. The boat is, oh God. I heard a tremendous crashing sound, followed by more screaming, then silence. Victoria, are you there? A few seconds later, her voice came back, shaking and breathless. Mom, I'm here. The yacht, We're getting hit by huge waves, and people are hurt, and the captain says we need to get back to shore, but I don't know if we can make it, and… Where are you exactly? I interrupted gently, moving to my husband's study where I'd already prepared a nautical chart of the Connecticut coast. I don't know. Somewhere off the coast. We've been out for hours, and James is throwing up, and his mother is crying, and Amanda hit her head when we got thrown around. Another crash, more screaming, and Victoria sobbed into the phone. Mom, I'm so scared. I've never been so scared in my life. I closed my eyes and let the moment settle. For 3 hours, while Victoria had been posting photos of her exclusive celebration, I'd been sitting in my warm, safe house, knowing exactly what was coming. I'd orchestrated this moment as precisely as a conductor leading a symphony. Listen to me, Victoria, I said, my voice carrying the authority that had gotten her through childhood nightmares and teenage crises. I need you to take deep breaths and tell me exactly what's happening. The captain is trying to get back to Mystic Harbor, but the waves are so big and the wind is so loud, and people are saying the boat might sink. The boat is not going to sink, I said firmly, though I had no way of knowing that for certain. The Golden Dawn is a seaworthy vessel, and Captain Rodriguez is experienced. But Victoria, I need you to listen very carefully.
Okay, I'm listening.
Are you wearing your life jacket? Life jacket? I know, nobody told us. Go find the life jackets immediately. They should be in lockers marked with safety signs. Get one for yourself and help others find theirs. Mom, I can't move around. The boat is rocking so hard. Another tremendous crash interrupted her, followed by what sounded like breaking glass. Victoria, are you hurt? No, but, Mom, James is hurt bad. He fell and hit his head, and there's blood everywhere, and his parents are freaking out. I felt a cold satisfaction settle in my chest. James, who'd supported Victoria's decision to exclude me, who'd backed up her story about the yacht being overcrowded, was now bleeding and helpless, while his wife called the mother she deemed too old for their sophisticated celebration. Is he conscious? Yes, but he's dizzy, and he keeps throwing up. Mom, what should I do? I don't know what to do. For 35 years, Victoria had come to me with her problems. Scraped knees, broken hearts, Failed job interviews, divorce proceedings. I'd always been there with solutions, comfort, and unconditional support. Even as she'd grown older and more dismissive of my advice, she'd still called me when things went wrong. Tonight, she'd excluded me from her celebration because I was too dramatic and wouldn't fit in with her young, sophisticated crowd. Now her sophisticated crowd was screaming in terror while she begged her dramatic old mother to save them. "Victoria," I said quietly, "where exactly are Harold and Susan right now?" They're right here with James, trying to help him. But Mom, Susan keeps saying this is all our fault for not listening to you about family celebrations, and Harold is saying he should have insisted you be invited, and I smiled in the darkness of my study. Harold and Susan, who'd gone along with Victoria's exclusion of me, were now realizing exactly whose judgment they should have trusted. "What about your friend Amanda? Is she all right?" "She's hurt too. She has a cut on her forehead, and she keeps saying she should have stayed home, that she should have known this was a bad idea." "Mom, everyone is saying we should have canceled the cruise when the weather reports came in, but James insisted we could handle it, and I supported him because I wanted the party to be perfect." Another crash, more screaming, and when Victoria came back on the line, she was sobbing hysterically. "Mom, I think we're going to die out here. I think this is it. And the last thing I said to you was that you were too old for our party, and I'm so sorry, I'm so sorry. Victoria." My voice cut through her panic like a blade. "You are not going to die. Do you know why?" "Why?" she whispered. "Because, unlike you, I actually planned for this possibility. I've been monitoring the weather all day, and I made arrangements to ensure that help would be ready when you needed it." "What do you mean?" I walked to my window and looked out at the storm raging across my property. "I mean that when you excluded your mother from your family celebration, you forgot something important. You forgot that mothers protect their children, even when their children don't deserve it." "Mom, the Coast Guard is standing by, Victoria. I called in favors, made sure they'd be watching your yacht tonight. When Captain Rodriguez sends out a distress signal, and he will send one out very soon, help will already be in position to reach you." There was silence on the other end of the line except for the sound of wind and crashing waves. You knew this would happen?" I chose my words carefully. I knew that taking 30 people out on a yacht in a winter storm was dangerous. I knew that your husband's arrogance and your party planning were a deadly combination. And I knew that when it all went wrong, you'd call me. But why didn't you stop us? The question hung in the air between us like a sword. Because, darling, you told me I was too old and too dramatic to be included in your celebration. You made it clear that my judgment wasn't welcome, that my presence would ruin your perfect evening. So, I let you have exactly the evening you planned. Victoria was crying now, deep, gut-wrenching sobs that I could hear even over the storm noise. "I'm so sorry, Mom. I'm so sorry I said those things. I was wrong, I was so wrong." "Yes, you were wrong. But we'll discuss that later, after you're safely back on shore." A new voice came on the line. Captain Rodriguez, sounding strained and exhausted. "Mrs. Stone? This is Captain Rodriguez. I need to inform you that I'm about to send out a Mayday call. We've taken significant damage, and I can't safely navigate back to harbor in these conditions." "I understand, Captain. How long before help arrives?" "The Coast Guard says they have a cutter standing by about 10 miles from our position. Maybe 30 minutes once I send the distress signal." 30 minutes. 30 minutes of terror for Victoria and her exclusive guest list. 30 minutes of realizing that their sophisticated celebration had become a fight for survival. 30 minutes of understanding exactly whose judgment they should have trusted. "Captain Rodriguez," I said, "please keep my daughter and the other passengers as safe as possible. And Captain, when you radio the Coast Guard, tell them that Bridget Stone sends her regards." After I hung up, I poured myself another glass of wine and returned to my elegant table for one. Outside, The storm raged with beautiful fury, nature delivering the justice that human decency had failed to provide. I raised my glass in a toast to the empty chair across from me, the place that should have been Victoria's if she'd possessed even basic respect for her mother. "Happy New Year, darling," I said to the darkness. "I hope you're finally learning the difference between sophistication and wisdom." Then I settled back to wait for the next phone call, the one that would come from the Coast Guard station, informing me that my daughter and her precious guests were being rescued from the consequences of their own arrogance. The evening was unfolding exactly as I'd planned. At 11:43 p.m., Captain Rodriguez sent out the Mayday call that I'd been expecting for the last hour. "Mayday, Mayday, Mayday. This is motor vessel Golden Dawn. We are taking heavy seas and have sustained damage to our superstructure. We have 38 souls aboard and are requesting immediate assistance." Lieutenant Commander Sarah Webb, Tom Hartwell's contact at the Coast Guard station, responded within 30 seconds. "Golden Dawn, this is Coast Guard New London. We have been monitoring your position and have cutter vigilance standing by. What is your current status?" "Coast Guard, we have multiple injured passengers, significant water ingress on the lower deck, and I've lost my starboard engine. We are approximately 12 miles southeast of Mystic Harbor and unable to maintain course in these sea conditions." I was listening to this exchange on my marine radio, a relic from David's sailing days that I'd had restored and tuned specifically for tonight. The calm professionalism of the Coast Guard contrasted sharply with the panic I could hear in Rodriguez's voice. "Golden Dawn, Vigilant is en route to your position. ETA 25 minutes. Can you maintain stability until then?" "Negative, Coast Guard. We're taking green water over the bow, and I've got passengers in panic. I may need to deploy life rafts." Life rafts. The sophisticated party that Victoria had planned was now a matter of survival at sea. My phone rang again. "Victoria, of course."
Mom.
"The captain says we might have to get in life rafts. I don't want to get in the water. I'm so scared." "Victoria, listen to me very carefully. The Coast Guard is almost there. You're going to be rescued. But I need you to do exactly what the captain tells you to do." "But what if the life rafts don't work? What if we drown out here? What if?" "Then you'll have learned a very expensive lesson about the difference between celebration and survival," I said calmly. The harshness of my words seemed to shock her into silence. "Mom." "What, darling? Are you angry at me?" I looked around my warm, elegant dining room, at the perfect meal I'd prepared for one, at the champagne chilling in ice while my daughter faced hypothermia in the North Atlantic.
"I'm disappointed, Victoria."
Profoundly disappointed that my only remaining child chose to exclude me from what she called a family celebration. But angry?
"No, sweetheart."
I'm not angry. I was something much more dangerous than angry. I was coldly, precisely vindictive. "Mom, when we get back, if we get back, can we talk? I mean, really talk." "Of course, darling. We'll have all the time in the world to discuss your decision-making process." Another voice came on the line. Harold, James's father, who'd helped fund this disastrous evening. "Bridget?" "Bridget, it's Harold. I wanted to tell you, we should have insisted you be included tonight. Susan and I both said so, but we let James and Victoria overrule us, and that was wrong." Harold Vanderberg, prominent businessman and longtime family friend, was apologizing to me from a sinking yacht. The man who'd gone along with my exclusion was now acknowledging that my judgment should have been respected. "Harold, the important thing now is getting everyone safely back to shore." "Yes, but Bridget, I want you to know, when this is over, Susan and I are going to have some serious words with our son about how families should treat each other. What Victoria did tonight, excluding her own mother, it's not acceptable." I felt a warm glow of satisfaction. Harold and Susan would remember this night every time they looked at their daughter-in-law. Victoria's relationship with James's family would never recover from the humiliation of having to be rescued from her own arrogance. I appreciate that, Harold. Give Susan my love. At midnight, as New Year's Eve became New Year's Day, Coast Guard Cutter Vigilant reached the Golden Dawn. I was listening to the radio traffic as the rescue unfolded. 38 people transferred from a damaged yacht to a Coast Guard vessel in 12-foot seas and 40-knot winds. It was a textbook rescue operation, but it was also a humiliating end to what Victoria had promised would be the most incredible New Year's Eve ever. Instead of toasting champagne at midnight under the stars, she was huddled in a Coast Guard survival blanket, soaking wet and hypothermic, watching her sophisticated party guests vomit seasickness into Coast Guard-issued bags. Instead of the glamorous photos she'd planned to post on social media, the only images of her evening would be Coast Guard documentation of a rescue operation caused by poor judgment and maritime negligence. Instead of being celebrated as a hostess who threw unforgettable parties, she would be known as the woman whose New Year's Eve cruise had to be rescued by the Coast Guard. At 12:47 a.m., my phone rang one final time. Mrs. Stone? This is Lieutenant Commander Webb. I wanted to inform you that all passengers and crew from the Golden Dawn have been safely transferred to our vessel. We're heading back to New London Harbor now. How is my daughter? Shaken but uninjured, ma'am. She's asking for you. I'll meet you at the harbor. Ma'am, if you don't mind my saying so, your phone call earlier tonight probably saved lives. If we hadn't been in position when that yacht got into trouble. I'm just glad everyone is safe, Commander. I hung up and began preparing for the final act of this evening's drama. I needed to look like exactly what I was, a dignified, responsible adult who'd spent her New Year's Eve planning for other people's poor decisions. I selected a wool coat appropriate for a middle-of-the-night rescue operation, comfortable boots for standing on docks, and a thermos of hot coffee that I could share with traumatized party guests. I would arrive at that harbor looking competent, prepared, and motherly, everything that Victoria's sophisticated celebration had failed to provide. When the local news crews arrived to cover the story of the New Year's Eve yacht rescue, they would see me comforting my daughter and her friends, looking like the kind of woman who should never be excluded from family gatherings. The kind of woman whose judgment should be respected, whose experience should be valued, whose presence should be cherished rather than dismissed. The kind of woman who is dangerous to underestimate. I arrived at New London Harbor at 2:15 a.m. to find chaos. Ambulances lined the dock, their red and blue lights reflecting off the wet pavement. Local news crews had gotten wind of the story. Luxury yacht rescued in New Year's storm, and were setting up cameras to capture the dramatic conclusion to Connecticut's most disastrous party. The Coast Guard Cutter Vigilant approached the dock with 38 passengers who'd left Mystic Harbor in evening wear and were returning in Coast Guard survival blankets. The contrast was striking and would make excellent television. I positioned myself at the front of the crowd of family members waiting to reunite with their loved ones. I dressed carefully for this moment, elegant but practical, concerned but composed, looking exactly like the kind of woman who belonged at the center of a family crisis. Victoria was among the first passengers off the cutter, and the sight of her was both satisfying and heartbreaking. Her silver cocktail dress was ruined with salt water and vomit stains, her perfect makeup was streaked across her face, and her hair hung in wet tangles around her shoulders. She looked like exactly what she was, a woman whose arrogance had nearly gotten her killed. When she saw me waiting on the dock, she broke into sobs and ran into my arms like a child.
Mom.
Oh, Mom, I thought I was going to die out there. I thought I'd never see you again, and the last thing I said to you was so horrible. I held her tightly, aware that the news cameras were capturing this reunion. Tomorrow's papers would show me comforting my daughter, looking maternal and forgiving while she looked broken and grateful. It's all right, darling. You're safe now. James was carried off on a stretcher, still suffering from the head injury he'd sustained when the yacht was hit by the massive wave. He was conscious, but clearly disoriented, and the paramedics were treating him for a possible concussion. As they loaded him into an ambulance, Harold and Susan approached me with expressions of profound gratitude and shame. "Bridget," Susan said, tears streaming down her face, "we owe you an apology. If you hadn't made arrangements with the Coast Guard, if you hadn't been watching out for our children even after they excluded you." She couldn't finish the sentence, but she didn't need to. Everyone standing on that dock understood that I was the reason their loved ones were alive. Harold cleared his throat, looking older than his 70 years. "Bridget, I want you to know that James will be having a very serious conversation with us about family values and respect when he recovers. What happened tonight, excluding you from a family celebration, it's unacceptable." I nodded graciously, playing the role of the forgiving mother perfectly. The important thing is that everyone is safe. But internally, I was cataloging every moment of vindication. Harold and Susan would never look at Victoria the same way again. They'd never trust her judgment about family matters. And they'd never forget that the mother she'd excluded was the person who'd saved their son's life. The news cruise approached as Victoria clung to me, still wrapped in her Coast Guard blanket. "Mrs. Stone, we understand your daughter was aboard the yacht that had to be rescued tonight. How are you feeling?" I looked directly into the camera, my arm around Victoria's shoulders, projecting maternal strength and dignity. "I'm grateful to the Coast Guard for their professionalism and courage in rescuing these passengers. As a mother, you always worry when your children are in danger, but I'm thankful that everyone is safely back on shore." The reporter pushed further. "Were you aware of the dangerous weather conditions when the yacht departed?" This was the moment I'd been preparing for all evening. I was monitoring the marine weather reports throughout the day, and I was concerned about the forecast. I made sure that the appropriate authorities were aware of the yacht's departure and position, just in case assistance became necessary. I didn't say that I'd excluded myself from the cruise. I didn't say that Victoria had told me I was too old and dramatic to attend. I let the facts speak for themselves. I was the responsible adult who'd planned for this possibility, while others were planning party favors. The reporter turned to Victoria. "Was it like out there during the storm?" Victoria looked up at me, then at the camera, her face still streaked with tears and exhaustion.
It was terrifying.
"The worst night of my life. We should never have gone out in those conditions, but we thought we knew better then." She trailed off, realizing she was about to admit on camera that they'd ignored maritime safety advice. "We were foolish," she said finally. "My mother tried to warn us about the weather, but we thought we could handle it. We were wrong." This was not true. I hadn't tried to warn them about anything. I'd simply let them proceed with their plans while making sure rescue would be available when needed. But I didn't correct Victoria's version of events. Let the public think I was the wise mother whose warnings had been ignored by reckless children. It fit the narrative perfectly. Over the following days, the story became a sensation in Connecticut social circles. The dramatic rescue, the injured passengers, the complete failure of what had been promoted as the most exclusive New Year's Eve celebration of the season. It had everything that wealthy people loved to gossip about. But the detail that fascinated everyone was the role I'd played. While Victoria and her friends had been posting glamorous photos from the yacht, dismissing concerns about the weather, I'd been quietly ensuring that the Coast Guard would be ready to save them from their own poor judgment. I became the hero of the story, the experienced, dignified mother whose wisdom and foresight had saved 38 lives. Victoria became the cautionary tale, the ungrateful daughter who'd excluded her own mother from a family celebration, only to need that same mother's help to survive the consequences of her arrogance. The social consequences for Victoria were severe and immediate. The friends who'd attended her disastrous party began distancing themselves from her. The society connections she'd cultivated started declining her invitations. The interior design clients she'd courted began questioning her judgment. When you nearly kill 38 people with poor planning, your reputation for sophisticated entertaining tends to suffer. But the most devastating blow came from James's family. Harold and Susan, who'd always been cordial but somewhat distant with Victoria, now treated her with barely concealed disappointment. They made it clear that they blamed her, at least partially, for the disaster that had injured their son and traumatized their family. More importantly, they began treating me with a level of respect and deference that Victoria had never received from them. I was now the family matriarch whose judgment should be sought, whose wisdom should be respected, whose presence should be valued. I had become the center of the family structure that Victoria had tried to exclude me from. 3 days after the rescue, Victoria called me, her voice small and broken. "Mom, can I come over? I need to talk to you." "Of course, darling. Come home." When she arrived at my house, she looked like a different person from the confident woman who dismissed me as too old for her party. The experience had aged her, humbled her, stripped away the casual cruelty she displayed with such confidence. "Mom," she said, sitting in my living room like a chastened child, "I need to apologize. Not just for excluding you from the cruise, but for the way I've been treating you for years." I waited for her to continue. "I've been horrible to you. Dismissive, disrespectful, ungrateful. I treated you like you were some embarrassing old woman instead of my mother, who sacrificed everything for me." She was crying now, deep, genuine tears of remorse. "And when everything went wrong out there, when we were all terrified and helpless, you were the only person who cared enough to make sure we'd be rescued. Even after I excluded you, even after I said those terrible things about you being too old and dramatic, you still protected me." I reached out and took her hand, feeling the tremor of genuine emotion in her fingers. "Victoria, I will always be your mother. That doesn't change, no matter how you treat me." "But why?" she sobbed. "Why did you help us after what I did to you?" I looked at my daughter, this woman I'd raised and loved and watched grow into someone I barely recognized, and gave her the answer she needed to hear. "Because sometimes, darling, people need to learn their lessons the hard way. And sometimes, a mother's job is to make sure they survive long enough to learn them." In the weeks following the rescue, I watched Victoria unravel with the clinical detachment of a scientist observing a controlled experiment. The confident, dismissive woman who'd excluded me from her celebration had been replaced by someone fragile, uncertain, haunted by the memory of how close she'd come to death. James spent 10 days in the hospital recovering from his concussion and exposure-related complications. During his convalescence, the full scope of the evening's disaster became clear. 3 guests had required emergency surgery for injuries sustained during the storm. 2 elderly passengers had developed pneumonia from exposure. The yacht itself had suffered nearly $1 million in damage and would never sail again. But the psychological damage was even more severe than the physical consequences. Victoria had always defined herself through her social connections, her ability to host elegant events, her reputation as someone who could organize memorable celebrations. The New Year's Eve disaster had shattered that identity completely. "Mom," she said during one of her daily visits to my house, "I keep having nightmares about that night. I dream that we're still on the yacht, and the waves are getting bigger, and I'm calling for you, but you're not there, because I told you not to come." I served her tea in my finest china, the same ritual I'd performed throughout her childhood when she was upset about something. But now she was 35 years old, sitting in my living room like a broken child, seeking comfort from the mother she'd deemed too old for her sophisticated life. "The dreams will fade, darling. Will they? Because I keep thinking about what you said on the phone that night. About how you knew this would happen, about how you made arrangements for the Coast Guard to be ready. Mom, did you know we were going to be in danger?" The question she'd been avoiding for weeks had finally surfaced. Victoria was beginning to understand that her rescue hadn't been a coincidence. I knew that taking 30 people out on a yacht in a winter storm was dangerous, I replied, exactly as I had that night. I knew that ignoring weather warnings was foolish. And I knew that when it all went wrong, you'd need help. But you could have stopped us. You could have called the Coast Guard before we left harbor, told them not to let us sail in those conditions. I looked at my daughter over my teacup, remembering the casual cruelty with which she'd excluded me, the hashtag about no old people allowed, the deliberate humiliation of being left behind while her college friends attended our family celebration. Victoria, you made it very clear that my judgment wasn't welcome. You told me I was too old and too dramatic to be part of your celebration. So, I let you have exactly the celebration you planned. The truth of what I'd done was finally sinking in. Victoria stared at me with growing horror and understanding. You let us go out there knowing we'd be in danger. I let you experience the consequences of dismissing your mother's wisdom and excluding me from a family gathering. There's a difference. Victoria stood up abruptly, pacing to my window and looking out at the peaceful grounds of my estate. My God, Mom, you could have let us die out there. But I didn't. I made sure the Coast Guard was ready to rescue you, just as I've spent 35 years rescuing you from the consequences of your poor decisions. She turned to face me, her eyes wide with the realization of what kind of woman she'd been dealing with. You planned the whole thing. You wanted us to be terrified, wanted us to be humiliated, wanted us to nearly die so we'd appreciate you. I set down my teacup with the gentle precision that had taken 60 years to perfect. What I wanted, Victoria, was for you to understand that your mother is not someone to be dismissed, excluded, or treated as an embarrassment. What I wanted was for you to learn that wisdom comes with age, and that sophistication without judgment is just arrogance in evening wear. Victoria sank back into her chair, the full magnitude of my orchestration finally clear to her. You're not the person I thought you were.
No, darling.
I'm exactly the person who raised you, protected you, and loved you for 35 years. The difference is that now you understand the depths of what that love is capable of. Over the following days, Victoria's breakdown accelerated. She stopped eating regularly, stopped maintaining her usual perfect appearance, stopped trying to rebuild her social connections. The confident woman who'd casually dismissed me as too old for her party had been replaced by someone afraid of her own mother. James, still recovering from his injuries, began blaming Victoria for the disaster. Their arguments could be heard throughout their house, James insisting that Victoria's need for social validation had nearly killed them all, Victoria defending herself weakly while acknowledging that she'd made terrible decisions. Your mother tried to warn us, James said during one particularly vicious fight that Victoria later recounted to me. She knew it was dangerous, and we ignored her because you were embarrassed to have her at your precious party. That's not what happened, Victoria protested, but her voice lacked conviction. Isn't it? You excluded your own mother from a family celebration, and when she tried to protect us anyway, we nearly died because we were too arrogant to listen to someone with actual experience and judgment. The marriage that had seemed so perfect, so socially advantageous, began fracturing under the weight of blame and recrimination. James's parents made their disappointment with Victoria increasingly clear, while Victoria's own friends distanced themselves from the disaster she'd created. But the cruelest irony was that in losing everyone else, Victoria became increasingly dependent on me, the mother she'd tried to exclude from her life. She began calling me multiple times a day, seeking reassurance, advice, comfort. She started spending entire afternoons at my house, sitting in rooms where she'd grown up, trying to recapture some sense of security and belonging. Mom, she said one afternoon, curled up on my sofa like the child she'd once been, everyone blames me for what happened that night. James, his parents, our friends, they all think it's my fault that people got hurt. What do you think, Victoria? She was quiet for a long moment, staring at the fire I'd built in the fireplace. I think you're the only person who ever really loved me. And I think I'm the stupidest woman alive for trying to push you away. I felt a complex mixture of satisfaction and genuine sadness. This broken woman on my sofa was what remained of the confident daughter who'd thought she could exclude her mother from her life without consequences. Victoria, I said gently, love isn't something you can take for granted. It requires respect, gratitude, and recognition of its value. You forgot that, and this is what forgetting looks like. She nodded, tears streaming down her face. How do I fix this, Mom? How do I fix what I've done? I looked at my daughter, humbled, frightened, finally understanding the price of her arrogance, and realized that my revenge was complete. Victoria would never again dismiss me as too old or too dramatic. She would never again exclude me from family gatherings. She would never again take my love and protection for granted. But more than that, she would spend the rest of her life knowing that her own mother was capable of orchestrating her near-death experience as a lesson in respect. You start, I said, by understanding that some lessons can only be learned through consequences. And some consequences are too severe to undo completely. Victoria curled deeper into the sofa, looking smaller and more vulnerable than she had since childhood. She was finally ready to learn what it meant to be my daughter. If this story of calculated justice is gripping you, hit that like button and share your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever been underestimated by family only to prove your true power? Don't forget to subscribe for more incredible stories of transformation and strength. And remember, our book, Reclaiming Your Peace After Pain, is filled with wisdom for anyone rebuilding their life after betrayal. The link is in the description below. Now, let's see how Bridget's story concludes. 6 months after the New Year's Eve disaster, I hosted my first dinner party in 3 years. Not because I needed the social interaction, but because I wanted to demonstrate exactly who held power in our family now. The guest list was carefully curated. Harold and Susan Vanderberg, several prominent families from our social circle, Victoria and James, whose marriage was limping along but still intact, and Amanda, Victoria's college friend who'd been injured during the yacht rescue. I planned the evening with the same precision I'd applied to Victoria's maritime education. The menu was elegant but not ostentatious. The conversation topics were carefully chosen, and the seating arrangement ensured that everyone would remember exactly who was the gracious hostess and who were the grateful guests. Victoria arrived early, as she always did now, to help with preparations. The confident woman who'd once dismissed my entertaining skills as outdated had been replaced by someone eager to learn from my decades of experience. Mom, the table looks incredible, she said, surveying my dining room where crystal and silver gleamed under the chandelier. I forgot how beautiful your dinner parties always were. You didn't forget, darling. You just decided they weren't sophisticated enough for your new social circle. Victoria flinched at the reminder, but didn't argue. She'd stopped defending her past behavior, understanding finally that her judgment had been fatally flawed. When the guests arrived, the dynamics were immediately apparent. Harold and Susan greeted me with a deference due to a family matriarch, thanking me effusively for including them in such an elegant evening. James, still dealing with occasional headaches from his concussion, was subdued and respectful. Most tellingly, everyone asked about my well-being, my recent activities, my opinions on various topics. I had become the center of attention that Victoria had once claimed for herself. During cocktails, Amanda pulled me aside. Mrs. Stone, I wanted to thank you again for what you did that night. If you hadn't made arrangements with the Coast Guard, I'm just glad everyone made it home safely, dear. But I keep thinking about it, about how you knew to be prepared, how you had everything arranged before we even realized we were in danger. It's like you could see the future. I smiled, sipping my wine. Experience teaches you to recognize patterns, Amanda. When people ignore warnings and make decisions based on what they want rather than what's safe, the consequences are usually predictable. During dinner, the conversation naturally turned to family relationships and the importance of intergenerational wisdom. Harold shared stories about learning business principles from his father, while Susan discussed the charity work she'd inherited from her mother. It's something young people today don't always appreciate, Harold said, looking directly at Victoria and James. The value of experience, the importance of listening to people who've lived through more than you have. Victoria kept her eyes on her plate, the color rising in her cheeks. Take that night on the yacht, Susan continued. If we'd paid attention to Bridget's concerns about the weather, if we'd trusted her judgment instead of dismissing her as overly cautious. We nearly died because we thought we knew better than someone with 60 years of life experience, James said quietly. It was the most honest thing he'd said about the disaster. I allowed the conversation to continue, letting my guests make the points I wanted made, without appearing to lecture anyone. The message was clear. I was the wise matriarch whose judgment should be respected, while Victoria and James were the chastened children who'd learned a harsh lesson about humility. After dinner, Victoria approached me privately. Mom, I need to tell you something. James and I have been talking and we want to make some changes. What kind of changes? We want to move back home, into the guest wing of your house. We want to be closer to you, to learn from you. We realize we've been making decisions without considering your wisdom, and we don't want to make that mistake anymore. I set down my coffee cup, considering this unexpected development. Victoria and James wanted to live under my roof, subjecting themselves to my daily oversight and guidance. That's a significant decision, Victoria. Are you certain?
Yes.
Completely certain. We've been struggling since the accident, financially, socially, emotionally. We need your stability, your experience. We need to be part of a family structure where wisdom is respected rather than dismissed. As the evening wound down and guests prepared to leave, I received the kind of compliments I hadn't heard in years. Bridget, this was exquisite, Susan said, embracing me warmly. Just like the wonderful dinners you used to host. I'd forgotten how elegant and gracious you always were. We must do this more regularly, Harold added. Victoria is so lucky to have a mother with such refined taste and social skills. The transformation was complete. I was no longer the aging mother to be managed and minimized. I was the matriarch whose approval was essential, whose wisdom was respected, whose presence was valued above all others. 1 year later, I stood on the shore of Long Island Sound, watching the gray December waves crash against the rocks. It was the anniversary of Victoria's disastrous New Year's Eve cruise, and I'd come here to reflect on how completely my life had changed in the past 12 months. Victoria and James had indeed moved into my guest wing, transforming my quiet house into a multi-generational home where my judgment was sought on every decision, from financial investments to social engagements. The woman who'd once dismissed me as too old for her sophisticated parties now deferred to my experience on everything. The power dynamic in our family had shifted completely. I was no longer the aging mother to be managed. I was the matriarch whose approval was essential, whose wisdom was respected, whose presence was valued above all others. Their marriage had survived, but barely. The stress of the rescue, the social humiliation, and the financial cost of the disaster had revealed cracks in their relationship that might never fully heal. But they stayed together, bound now by shared trauma and the knowledge that they needed my stability more than they needed romantic fulfillment. The broader social consequences had been even more satisfying. The story of the New Year's Eve yacht rescue had become legendary in Connecticut's social circles, a cautionary tale about the dangers of excluding family members and ignoring the wisdom of elders. I had become something of a celebrity among women my age, the grandmother who taught an ungrateful daughter the most expensive lesson of her life. Victoria's social standing, by contrast, had never recovered. She was known now as the woman whose arrogance had nearly killed 38 people. Her interior design business had collapsed, her friendships had withered, and her position in James's family remained permanently diminished. As I walked along the winter shore, my phone rang. Victoria, of course. She called me every day now, multiple times, seeking guidance and reassurance from the mother she'd once deemed too dramatic. Mom, where are you? I wanted to discuss the menu for tomorrow night's dinner party. I'm at the beach, darling. Taking a walk and thinking. The beach? Mom, it's freezing and windy. Come home before you catch cold. The irony wasn't lost on me. Victoria, who'd once told me I was too old for a yacht party, was now worried about me taking a simple walk on a winter beach. When I arrived home, Victoria met me at the door with a cup of hot tea and a worried expression. Mom, you're freezing. Why would you go to the beach on such a cold day? I wanted to think about the past year, darling. About how much has changed since your New Year's Eve cruise. Victoria's face clouded with the shame and regret that now accompanied any mention of that night. I wish I could undo that evening, not just because of the danger, but because of what I did to you. Excluding you, dismissing you, treating you like you were somehow less important. That evening, as we prepared dinner together in my kitchen, Victoria asked the question I'd been waiting for her to ask for months. Mom, did you plan the whole thing? The storm, the rescue, all of it. I looked at my daughter as I arranged vegetables on a serving platter, choosing my words with the care I'd learned to apply to all consequential conversations. I planned to make sure that when your poor judgment caught up with you, help would be available. I planned to ensure that your education in humility wouldn't be fatal. And I planned to teach you a lesson about the consequences of excluding people who love you. But you let us go out there knowing we'd be in mortal danger. I let you experience the consequences of your choices while ensuring those consequences would be survivable. Victoria nodded slowly, finally understanding the full scope of what I'd orchestrated. You're terrifying, Mom. In the most beautiful, elegant way possible, you're absolutely terrifying. I smiled at my daughter as I lit the candles on our dinner table.
Thank you, darling.
That's exactly what I intended you to learn. As we sat down to dinner in my beautiful dining room, I looked at Victoria across the table and felt the deep satisfaction of a story perfectly concluded. She would never again underestimate me, never again exclude me, never again take for granted the love and protection I'd provided for 36 years. She had learned that blood might run cold on water, but a mother's love and a mother's justice runs deeper than any ocean. And she would remember that lesson for the rest of her life. And there you have it, Bridget's incredible transformation from dismissed mother to feared matriarch. If this story moved you, if it made you think about the power that lies dormant in people others underestimate, please hit that like button right now. I want to hear from you in the comments below. Have you ever been excluded from family events? Have you ever been told you're too old to be included? Share your story. This community believes in the strength and wisdom of every generation. And if you're currently dealing with family members who dismiss your worth, who treat you as if your feelings don't matter, remember Bridget's story. You are not powerless. You are not irrelevant. Sometimes the most dangerous person in the room is the one everyone underestimates. This is exactly why our book, Reclaiming Your Peace After Pain, exists. It's filled with strategies for recognizing your own power, setting boundaries that demand respect, and transforming pain into strength. Whether you're dealing with dismissive family members, rebuilding after betrayal, or simply ready to stop being underestimated, this book will guide you toward the respect you deserve. Click the link in the description box and discover the power you never knew you had. If this story inspired you, subscribe to her true stories and hit that notification bell. We share powerful tales of transformation, justice, and the incredible strength of people who refuse to be dismissed. Because sometimes the most elegant revenge is simply showing people exactly who they're dealing with. Remember, you are wiser than they give you credit for, stronger than they assume, and more valuable than anyone who doesn't treat you with respect. Your best chapters, like Bridget's, might be the ones where you finally show the world who you really are. Until next time, never let anyone convince you that your experience doesn't matter, because experience is the foundation of wisdom, and wisdom is the most dangerous weapon of all.